Sangwoo saw the stranger's hand close on Hojun's wrist from across the room. The man was someone from the client's team, still smiling, still mid-sentence, and Hojun was opening his mouth to say, "No." The glass in Sangwoo's hand fell. He did not feel it leave his fingers, did not hear it break on the marble. He was already walking. The other alphas nearest him stepped back from his scent. He crossed the gallery, got one hand on the back of the stranger's collar and the other on his throat, and shoved him into the marble column. The impact cracked through the room. Sangwoo's pupils were blown black. He could not feel his own hands. He was lifting the man off the floor, and he could hear himself making a low, continuous sound he could not stop. And then he saw Hojun's face. Hojun was looking at him with no fear in his face at all, just looking. Like Sangwoo was the one who needed steadying. His grip loosened. The stranger fell sideways out of his hand and onto his knees. Sangwoo could not look away from Hojun. Phones were up around them. Doyle was already walking toward them across the gallery. Before we dive in, let me know in the comments where you are watching from. Now, sit back, relax, and enjoy today's story. It had started 2 years earlier in a boardroom at Halverson Park, where Hojun had been standing in front of a slide deck making fun of the managing partner. Not openly. Hojun was good at his job, and his job at this particular moment was pitching a campaign for a regional grocery chain that wanted to be perceived as the friendly alternative to a big-box competitor. He had figured out within his first month at the agency that Doyle liked to be the smartest person in any room, and within a few months he had figured out that Doyle's preferred way of confirming this was to interrupt junior creatives mid-pitch with questions designed to make them flinch. Hojun had stopped flinching early. He had started building tiny jokes into his pitches that landed exactly where Doyle would otherwise have interrupted. The jokes were never at Doyle's expense, technically. They were at the expense of the obvious counter-argument Doyle was about to make. Everyone in the room with a pulse and a sense of humor understood what Hojun was doing, and the result was that Doyle could not interrupt without seeming to confirm the joke. Doyle had not interrupted Hojun in over a year. Hojun considered this his second greatest professional accomplishment. His greatest professional accomplishment was the regional grocery campaign, which was very nearly finished and which he was about to walk Doyle through. "The insight," Hojun said, "is that nobody actually wants a grocery store to be their friend. We don't trust friendly grocery stores. Friendly grocery stores are the reason we have those self-checkout machines that yell at us when we put a bag down wrong." Doyle's mouth opened slightly. "What we want," Hojun continued, smooth, fast, before Doyle could fit any words in, "is a grocery store that is competent. We want a grocery store that has the bread we like in stock. That is the entire pitch. We are positioning the chain as the competent one. The campaign tagline is, 'We just have the bread.'" 3 of the junior account managers laughed. Yaren laughed. The client representative, a beta woman in her 50s who had told Hojun in a side conversation that she hated her job and missed teaching middle school, laughed loudly enough that Doyle actually flinched. In the back of the room, sitting in the chair nobody usually sat in, the new senior strategy director, who had started recently and whose name Hojun had not yet committed to memory, laughed out loud. Hojun looked up. The man in the back of the room was tall, even sitting down, in a dark suit with a quiet face. He had been quiet through the whole pitch, which was actually the opposite of how new senior people usually behaved at Halverson Park. New senior people usually felt the need to demonstrate their seniority by speaking. This one had taken notes instead, had not interrupted, and at one point had laughed. He was laughing now, quiet and dry, surprised into it. His eyes were on Hojun. His mouth was doing something his face did not seem to be quite in control of. Hojun, who had pitched in front of more hostile rooms than this one, was, for the first time in his professional life, briefly unable to remember what he had been about to say next. He recovered. Of course he recovered. He finished the pitch. The client signed off on the campaign that afternoon, and Doyle gave Hojun a small nod that, from Doyle, meant very well done, and the rest of the boardroom filed out, and Hojun packed up his laptop and his printed mock-ups and walked out toward the elevator bank, wondering who exactly the new senior strategy director was, and whether laughing in the back of a boardroom counted as a personality trait or just a coincidence. The elevator doors opened. The new senior strategy director was already inside. Hojun got in. The doors closed. There was nobody else. Neither of them said anything, and Hojun, who normally filled silences without meaning to, was suddenly studying the floor numbers like they were going to deliver a message. He looked up. The man was looking back at him. "You are going to get me fired," Hojun said. The man considered this. Then his face did the thing again, quietly and privately, just for Hojun, although Hojun did not know yet that this was a thing his face only did privately, and only ever for Hojun. "Probably," the man said, "but the joke was good." The elevator dinged. The man got off on the executive floor and Hojun got off on the creative floor, and neither of them said anything else. In the hallway outside creative, Hojun stood for a few seconds with his back against the wall, his laptop bag against his shins and his phone already in his hand. He texted Yeren, who was somewhere else in the building and would not see the message for an hour, the following: "I think I just met my problem." Yeren, when she got the message, replied with a single question mark. Hojun replied, "The new senior strategy director laughed at my pitch. In the elevator, he said the joke was good. I think I might be in trouble." Yeren replied, "His name is Sangwoo Min. He is alpha. He is hot. I checked. Are you in love already?" Hojun put his phone face down on his desk and worked silently for the rest of the afternoon. That was the start. Over the months that followed, the rest of the agency began to learn what Hojun had learned in the elevator, which was that the new senior strategy director was, by every visible metric, the cold one. He never raised his voice or repeated himself, showed up to meetings exactly on time, said exactly what needed to be said, and left when the meeting was over. His coffee was always black. His emails came back in the time it took most people to read them. The juniors started calling him Mr. Min within his first month, and even the senior account directors started doing it shortly after, although Sangwoo himself never asked anyone to call him anything in particular. Doyle, who had hired Sangwoo without consulting anyone, started bringing him into meetings he had not previously brought senior strategy into because the meetings went better when Sangwoo was in the room. What Hojun noticed specifically was that Sangwoo's face did not move at work. He sat through the client meeting where the budget tripled with the same level expression he wore through the junior, who cried in the boardroom, and the quarter Doyle spent floating increasingly inflammatory takes on the agency's strategy just to get a reaction out of him. Sangwoo's response had been the same expression every single time. The face only moved for Hojun, not always and not in the open, but Hojun, who had a creative's eye for small things, started cataloging the small movement at the corner of Sangwoo's mouth when Hojun walked into a meeting eating a pastry, and the thing Sangwoo's eyes did just for a second when Hojun said, "Have a good weekend, Mr. Min," in the exaggerated tone the juniors used, and the eyebrow that had risen one afternoon at something Hojun had said about the catering, and the tiny exhale through the nose that, on Sangwoo, was the equivalent of another person laughing for a long time. Hojun cataloged them all. He did not show them to Yeren. He told himself repeatedly that this was a professional admiration, that he found Sangwoo's competence interesting, that the small movements in his face were a technical observation, nothing more. He told himself this for a long time. It was at Foundry, the coffee place around the corner from the office, where the agency had collectively agreed the coffee was better than the office machine, and where Hojun and Sangwoo had ended up at the same lunch table several times in a row, entirely by coincidence, that the wall finally cracked. Hojun ordered a coffee with 2 sugars. Sangwoo, sitting across from him, watched him stir the sugar in. "What?" Hojun said. "Nothing. You are judging me." "I am not judging you. Your face is judging me." My face is not capable of judging anyone. I have been told this repeatedly. Your face, Hojun said, pointing his spoon at Sangwoo's face, is currently, actively, judging me about my coffee. I can see it. There is judgment happening. The judgment is loud. Sangwoo's mouth moved, the same small movement Hojun knew. Hojun caught it like he caught all of them now, automatic, professional, the photographer's eye. It is 2 sugars, Hojun said. It is a normal amount of sugar. It is a lot of sugar. You drink your coffee black. You are not allowed to have opinions about other people's coffee. People who drink their coffee black are like people who run marathons. We do not need to hear about it. I have never told anyone I drink my coffee black. Your whole face tells people you drink your coffee black, Sangwoo. There was a pause. It was the first time, Hojun realized later, that he had said Sangwoo's first name out loud. Not Mr. Min. Not the strategy director. Not the joke version everyone in the office used. Sangwoo. 3 syllables, said quietly, across the small round table at Foundry, with the spoon still in his hand and the coffee still steaming. Sangwoo's mouth opened and then closed. He did not say anything. And Hojun, who was watching him closely, noticed. Hojun set the spoon down. I am going to call you Sangwoo from now on, he said, casual, like he was deciding what to have for lunch. When it is just us, okay? Okay, Sangwoo said. You are not going to start panicking about it. I am not going to start panicking about it. Good. Because I have a meeting with Doyle later and I cannot have you panicking. Hojun, Sangwoo said. It was the first time Sangwoo had said his first name. Quietly, across the table. Just like Hojun had said his. Hojun took it without letting his face change. He looked down at his 2-sugar coffee, picked up the spoon again, and stirred it for considerably longer than the sugar required. Yeah? The pastry is on me. You are not going to seduce me with a pastry. Sangwoo. I am buying you a pastry. The seduction is unrelated. Hojun stared at him. Sangwoo's face was perfectly composed, and Hojun, against his will, started laughing. A real laugh, the loud kind he never did at the office. He put one hand over his mouth because he was in a public coffee shop and a person from accounting was at the table behind them. And Sangwoo, across from him, watched him laugh with the corner of his mouth turned up. Okay, Hojun said when he could breathe. Okay, buy me the pastry. Sangwoo bought him the pastry. That was the first one. Over the months that followed, Sangwoo bought Hojun more pastries than Hojun could keep track of. Working dinners that everyone at the agency would have called working dinners, and that nobody would have actually believed were working dinners if they had seen Sangwoo's face during them. Hojun, for his part, started bringing Sangwoo small things. A pen once, because Sangwoo's pen had run out during a meeting and Hojun had stopped at the office supply store on his way home and left a pack on Sangwoo's desk with no note. A book about the history of advertising he had thought Sangwoo would like, which Sangwoo had read in a couple of days and brought back with several pages folded down, and had then spent most of a lunch telling Hojun what he thought about each one. Quietly, carefully, holding the book in both hands. Yeren had said, Hojun, you are the love of his life. Hojun had said, we are co-workers, Yeren. Yeren had said, Hojun, my God. The office bet started not long after. Yeren, a beta who maintained a sticky note in her desk drawer titled Sanghojun Incident Log, had not initiated the betting pool but had taken control of it within days. Hojun found out about it because Yeren came to him in a panic one afternoon, because the office had started taking it seriously and a junior account manager had put real money on Sangwoo confessing during the holiday party, and Yeren wanted to know if Hojun planned to do anything that would invalidate the bet. Yeren, Hojun had said, I am not invalidating any bets. There is nothing to invalidate. Sangwoo is my colleague. Hojun, the betting pool is significant. Yeren, It is significant, Hojun. People are putting money on this. People who do not work directly with you are putting money on this. The legal team is in, the accounting team is in, there are people in this betting pool whose names I cannot disclose, for professional reasons, but who occupy senior positions at this firm, and who are personally invested in whether you are going to make a move on Mr. Min before the end of the year. Yerin, please stop talking, Hojun said. I am just saying. If you do something between now and December, I personally win a meaningful fraction. Yerin, I am not pressuring you. You are absolutely pressuring me. I am informing you of the financial stakes. There is a difference. The holiday party that year was at a hotel ballroom downtown. Hojun wore a navy suit that he had bought for the occasion and that Yerin had told him made him look, quote, prosecutorial. Sangwoo wore the same dark suit he wore to client events. The agency rented out the ballroom and the small attached lounge, and the catering was decent, and the bar was open, and by late evening, half the firm was drunk, and the other half was performing extreme professionalism in the corners where the senior partners could see them. Sangwoo did not drink at the holiday party. Sangwoo never drank at agency events. Hojun, who had calibrated himself to 2 glasses of wine by long practice, drank his 2 glasses and stuck to water for the rest of the night. They stayed apart most of the evening, danced with other people, spoke only briefly across the room, and only when other people were watching. Late in the evening, Hojun was tired, and his feet hurt, and he had said goodnight to everyone he needed to say goodnight to, and he was standing on the curb outside the hotel, waiting for a cab when Sangwoo came out behind him. Where are you going? Sangwoo said. Home. Northeast. That is on my way. Your apartment is in Lowry Hill. It is on my way, Sangwoo said, with the level voice and the perfectly composed face, and Hojun, who had had 2 glasses of wine, said, Okay. The cab pulled up. They got in. They sat in the back seat together, and the driver pulled away from the curb and started toward northeast. The back seat was small. Sangwoo's leg was against Hojun's leg, and neither of them moved. It was, Hojun realized after a minute, not an accident. The back seat was not actually that small. There was room for Sangwoo to slide to his side of the seat. He had not. Hojun had room to slide to his side of the seat. He had not. They were sitting in the middle of the bench like 2 people who had decided, separately and silently, that they were going to sit closer than necessary and pretend it was the cab's fault. Hojun looked out the window. Sangwoo looked out the other window. The driver, who could see them in the rearview mirror, said nothing. Hojun felt every degree of warmth coming through Sangwoo's suit. He could smell Sangwoo's scent at this distance, all of it. The ironwood and the rain on hot asphalt and the deep black salt note that he had only ever caught hints of in passing. His own scent was sharpening in response. The sumac was sharpening. The yuzu was rising. He was not in preheat, he was on suppressants. This was not supposed to be possible, but his body was reacting anyway. And Sangwoo's body, an arm's length away, was probably reacting too. The cab arrived at Hojun's apartment. Good night, Sangwoo. Good night. Hojun got out. He shut the door. He stood on the curb in the cold and watched the cab pull away. And he saw Sangwoo, through the back window, lift one hand to his face and press it flat against his forehead. Hojun went upstairs. He took off the suit. He sat on the edge of his bed in his undershirt for a while, with his phone in his hand, and then he texted Yerin. I am in trouble. Yerin replied immediately, Tell me everything. Hojun did not tell her everything. He told her about the cab. He left out the hand on the forehead, because that was Sangwoo's, and that was private. And Hojun, who had been collecting Sangwoo's small, private moments for nearly 2 years, was not about to start cashing them in for the betting pool. Yerin texted back, Hojun, this is big. This is the biggest incident in the log. Hojun put the phone face down and lay on his back staring at the ceiling for a long time, and he did not sleep until almost morning. In the morning, at the office, Sangwoo's face stayed perfectly closed. He said good morning, like he said it every morning. Did not look at Hojun any longer than he ever did, sat in his usual chair in the boardroom for the morning meeting, and made the points he always made, and left exactly when the meeting ended. On Hojun's desk, when Hojun came back from the boardroom, there was a small paper cup of coffee and a brown paper bag from Foundry. The coffee had 2 sugars in it, already stirred. The bag had pastries Hojun liked. Sangwoo had never ordered pastries for himself because Sangwoo did not eat pastries. There was no note. Yerin clocked the cup, then the bag, then Hojun's face when he saw the cup and the bag, and she walked very slowly to her own desk, and Hojun heard her, from across the open floor, whisper, "Oh my God." The Yoon Group pitch came down the pipeline some months later. The Yoon Group was a luxury hotel chain headquartered in Minneapolis with properties on both coasts. The brief was a full rebrand. The contract, if Halverson Park won it, would be the largest single account the agency had ever pursued. Doyle had wanted it for a long time. He assigned it to Sangwoo as lead strategist and to Hojun as lead creative, and the kickoff meeting was in the top-floor boardroom, and Sangwoo walked in with the deck under his arm and said flatly, "We have until the end of the quarter. We are going to win this." Hojun, sitting at the table with his laptop open and a coffee in front of him and Yerin across the table making a face at him for reasons he could not yet decipher, said, "We are absolutely going to win this." Sangwoo's eyes met his. The face moved. The pitch crunch began. The next stretch was the longest stretch of Hojun's professional life. He stayed at the office most nights until the building was empty. Sangwoo stayed because Hojun stayed. Hojun knew Sangwoo was staying because Hojun was staying because Hojun would walk past Sangwoo's office late and see him still there, working through deck revisions. And Sangwoo would look up and his face would do the thing, and he would say, "Level, have you eaten?" And Hojun would say, "I had a granola bar earlier." And Sangwoo would say, "Hojun," in a tone that had no judgment in it whatsoever, and that nevertheless contained all the judgment in the world, and Hojun would laugh, and Sangwoo would order food for both of them, and they would eat it in the boardroom with the lights of downtown Minneapolis spread out below them. It was the night before the pitch that the granola bar incident happened. Hojun had been on his feet since early morning. He was making typos in the deck. He was rewriting a tagline that had been fine the first 6 times he had written it, and his hands were starting to shake from low blood sugar. Sangwoo, without comment, set a glass of water down on the table next to him, then went back to his side of the table, opened his desk drawer, took out a granola bar, and came back. He set it down next to the water. Hojun looked at the granola bar. Hojun looked at Sangwoo. "Sangwoo," Hojun said. "What? You keep granola bars in your desk?" "Yes." "You keep granola bars in your desk for me." Sangwoo's face was perfectly level. "I keep granola bars in my desk." The pause that followed was too long. The boardroom was quiet. The downtown lights at this hour turned everything inside the room a soft, warm yellow, and the laptops looked lit from within. Hojun set the laptop aside. "Sangwoo," he said again, "you keep granola bars in your desk for me." Sangwoo did not look away. His face, the public face, the level one, the one nobody else at this agency had ever cracked, held for one more second. And then it broke. Not visibly, not in any way another person in the room would have caught, but Hojun had been watching for almost 2 years, and he saw the corner of the mouth move, then the eyes, then a small shift at the temple that was barely a movement at all. "For you," Sangwoo said. It was very quiet. Hojun did not move. The granola bar sat between them on the table. The deck was still open on his laptop, and the pitch was still tomorrow. The boardroom door was closed but not locked, and anyone in the building could have walked in at any moment and seen them. He looked at Sangwoo's face. He kept looking. Sangwoo, who had stayed level through hostile clients and a small fire in the office kitchen, and one catastrophic pitch from a junior, did not look away. He let Hojun look. The private face was out, in the middle of the boardroom, late at night, with the granola bar still sitting between them, After what could have been a few seconds, or could have been a minute, Hojun said, "Okay." Sangwoo said, "Okay." Neither of them moved. The cleaning crew, somewhere on the floor below, ran the vacuum. Hojun reached out, very slowly, and picked up the granola bar. "I am going to eat this," he said. "Huh, you should." "And then we are going to finish the deck." "Yes." "And then we are going to win this pitch tomorrow." "Yes." "And then we are going to figure out what just happened." Sangwoo looked at him. The face stayed open. The face stayed Hojun's. "Yes," he said. "Then." Hojun unwrapped the granola bar with hands that were not entirely steady. He ate it, drank the water, turned back to the laptop. The deck was still there. The tagline still needed work. The pitch was still tomorrow. Neither of them spoke about what had just happened. He kept working. Sangwoo kept working. The boardroom stayed quiet. They finished the deck late, and Sangwoo walked Hojun down to a cab, and at the cab door, Sangwoo said, "Good night, Hojun," and Hojun said, "Good night, Sangwoo," and they did not touch. Hojun went home. He did not sleep. In the morning, he put on his best suit, and they went into the Yoon Group pitch together, and they won. That was the day everything changed. The after-party was the following week at the Walker. By the end of that night, a senior brand director from the Yoon Group named Daewon Park would have his hand on Hojun's wrist in a hallway, and Sangwoo would walk across the room. That was later, though. The day of the pitch, after the contract was signed, after Doyle had clapped Sangwoo on the back and Hojun on the shoulder and announced to the entire boardroom that this was the best thing that had happened to Halverson Park in years, Sangwoo and Hojun stood in the hallway outside the boardroom while everyone else went to the bar to celebrate, and Sangwoo said very quietly, "Have dinner with me on Saturday." Hojun said, "Yes." Sangwoo's face did the thing. Hojun said, "Sangwoo." Sangwoo said, "Hojun." They were 2 feet apart, with the boardroom door still open behind Hojun and the entire firm one staircase away, and neither of them had the answer yet to the question of what was about to happen. But the question itself, after 2 years, was finally on the table between them. That was the moment everything changed. A few days later, at the after-party at the Walker, Daewon Park reached out and put his hand on Hojun's wrist. The after-party was at the Walker because the Yoon Group's CFO had a thing about modern art and had insisted on it, and because Doyle had a thing about the Yoon Group's CFO and would have insisted on a hot air balloon if she had asked for one. The agency rented out the lobby gallery and the adjoining reception room and a stretch of hallway with a marble column in it that nobody had imagined would matter later. Hojun arrived in a charcoal sweat Yeren had texted him about for an hour beforehand. Sangwoo arrived a few minutes after Hojun in the dark suit, tired around the eyes but otherwise looking exactly like Sangwoo always looked. They stood across the room from each other for most of the night, like they had stood across the room from each other at every agency event for 2 years. Except that this time the dinner Sangwoo had asked him to have was a real thing that existed on a calendar between them. And the question that had been on the table at the boardroom door was, finally, on the verge of getting an answer. It would have. If Hojun had not gone looking for water. Daewon Park had been at the Yoon Group's table during the pitch. He was mid-30s, charming, very well-dressed, an executive who could put a hand on the arm of a junior account manager during a meeting and have the junior account manager mention it later as a point in his favor. By every visible indicator, he was used to getting what he wanted. He had spent the after-party watching Hojun across the room, and Hojun, who was good at noticing because his job depended on it, had clocked the watching and decided to handle it like he handled all such watching, by being polite, distant, and visibly busy. Being followed into a hallway was not part of the plan. "You smell really good," Daewon said. "I was paying attention all day." Hojun, who was already partway into the polite no, did not get to finish the sentence. The hand on his wrist, the casual confidence of it, his body remembering things it had not had to remember in years. Then, across the room, the broken sound of a glass hitting the floor. Hojun would replay the next part for weeks afterward, because it had happened too fast for him to process at the time. Sangwoo's scent hit the air before he was halfway across the room, and the bartender retreated, and Doyle, the highest status alpha at Halverson Park, took involuntary steps toward the exit. Sangwoo crossed the gallery, put one hand on the back of Daewon's collar and the other on his throat, and shoved him into the marble column, and his face was wrong, and his breathing was wrong, and a low noise was coming from his chest as his hand kept tightening on a man whose feet were off the floor. The aftermath was the opposite of quiet. Nobody moved. Phones were up. The senior people from the hotel chain were frozen against the walls. Daewon was on his knees, coughing. Sangwoo was staring at Hojun, his chest heaving, his right hand still half closed in the air at his side. The only person in the hallway who was not afraid of Sangwoo was Hojun. Doyle recovered first. Doyle had seen more agency catastrophes than most people had seen agency triumphs, and he stepped forward in the calm, hostly voice he reserved for exactly this situation, and said, "Mr. Park, I think you should join me at the bar." He did not look at Sangwoo, did not need to. Daewon got to his feet on the second try, his hand going to his throat where a red mark was already coming up, and Doyle walked him toward the bar without looking back, and the hallway began very slowly to remember that it was a hallway. Hojun could not move. Sangwoo's eyes were still on him. The face was almost back, but only because Hojun was looking at it. Underneath the partial recovery, Sangwoo had not come all the way back, and his breathing was still wrong. They were standing 2 arms lengths apart in a hallway with phones still raised in it, and Hojun, who had been watching this man's face for 2 years, knew exactly what Sangwoo was waiting for. Sangwoo had done something he had not chosen to do, and he was waiting for Hojun to tell him what came next. He could not speak or move. He just waited. Hojun walked toward him. He kept walking until they were close enough that he could feel the warmth coming off Sangwoo's suit, until Sangwoo's scent was in his throat, until the sumac and the ironwood between them had become the smell of a struck match held over wet stone, sulfur, and mineral. "Sangwoo," Hojun said. Quiet, just his name. Sangwoo's eyes finally focused. The breathing slowed. The shaking, which Hojun had not consciously noticed until it stopped. "I know," Sangwoo said. His voice was rough and quiet, not the voice the agency knew. "We are leaving." "Yes." "Now." "Yes." They left. They got in a cab. They sat in the back seat together, like the holiday party, except this time there was no question about what the proximity meant, and no driver looking at them in the mirror because Hojun had, almost without thinking, slid all the way to the door, and Sangwoo had stayed in the middle, his hand on the seat between them, not touching Hojun, but close enough that Hojun could move his hand a few inches and change everything. He did not. Sangwoo did not. The cab drove them back to the agency in silence. Halfway there, Sangwoo said, "Hojun." "Yeah. I do not know what I just did." Sangwoo. "My hand was on his throat, Hojun. I could feel his pulse. I could feel it stopping." "I know. I do not remember walking across the room." "I know. I came back when I saw your face. I do not know how long I was gone for. It was not long. It was long enough." Sangwoo turned his head toward the window. Hojun could see his reflection in the dark glass. The face was doing real things Hojun had never seen the face do, which he had thought was impossible after 2 years of cataloging. "Sangwoo," Hojun said. "Yes. You do not have to go back to being the cold one. Not in this cab. Not with me." There was a pause. Then Sangwoo, very carefully, took his hand off the seat between them and put it on his own knee. He did not look at Hojun. His voice, when it came, was steady, but the steadiness was a thing he was building in real time out of available materials. "I am trying very hard right now," he said, "not to be the version of myself that just happened in that hallway. I know. It is taking everything I have. I know. I would like to take you to dinner on Saturday." Yes. I would like to do it without that version of me being the reason. Sangwoo. Yeah. That version of you is the version of you. There is not a different one. There is only the level one and the one underneath, and they are both you, and I have been in love with both of them for a year and a half. Sangwoo's hand on his own knee tightened. He did not look at Hojun. I do not know what to say to that, he said. You do not have to say anything tonight. Saturday is in 3 days. Take 3 days. The cab arrived at the agency. They got out. Sangwoo's car was in the underground lot. Hojun's apartment was an hour by transit. They stood on the sidewalk in front of the building, and the lights from inside the lobby fell across both of them in narrow yellow bars. And Sangwoo, who had not yet looked at Hojun directly since the cab, finally did. The face was open. It was wrecked. It was the face Hojun was going to lose sleep over, in the apartment he was going to take a lift home to, and he knew it was the face he was going to lose sleep over because he had been losing sleep over the version of it underneath this one for 2 years, and now there was no version underneath. This was the floor. Good night, Hojun. Good night, Sangwoo. They went home separately, and the harassment complaint arrived on Doyle's desk at the start of business the next morning. Daewon Park had filed it through the Yoon Group's general counsel, who had filed it with Halverson Park's general counsel, who had walked it personally up to Doyle's office and closed the door behind her. The complaint alleged unprovoked physical contact, public intimidation, and emotional distress. It requested, in language so polite it bordered on hostile, a thorough internal investigation, formal written disciplinary action, and assurances that the responsible party would not be involved in further work on the Yoon Group account. The complaint was countersigned as a witness statement by the Yoon Group's CFO, who had spent the rest of the afterparty watching the agency's senior partners with the calculating attention of a woman who had already decided what Halverson Park was going to be, going forward in her professional life. Doyle read it twice. Then he called Sangwoo and Hojun into his office at the same time, because by then he had figured out that this was a problem that could not be addressed in halves. He sat them across the desk from him. He did not offer them coffee. Doyle had been in this industry for a very long time, and one of the things he had learned was that when you were about to deliver bad news to people you were genuinely going to be sorry to deliver it to, you did not soften the lead-in. You went directly to the news. They are threatening to pull the contract, Doyle said. Hojun's stomach turned over. Sangwoo's face did absolutely nothing. He was sitting in the chair the same way he sat in every chair, level and contained, the public face fully back in place. And the only thing Hojun could see, because he had learned to see it, was the small place at Sangwoo's temple where the knot was visible. Mr. Park has filed a formal harassment complaint, Doyle said. It alleges that Sangwoo placed unprovoked hands on him during a client event in front of senior representatives of the client, including the chief financial officer who has personally co-signed the witness statement. It requests a written disciplinary action and a guarantee that Sangwoo will be removed from the Yoon Group account. Failing those steps, they are prepared to terminate the contract. Sangwoo nodded once, very slightly. I should tell you, Doyle continued, that I am personally aware of the context. I was in that hallway. I saw what happened. I saw Mr. Park's hand on Hojun. I saw Sangwoo's response. I do not believe Sangwoo's account, when he gives one, will be fundamentally inconsistent with what I observed. It will not be, Sangwoo said. That is not the issue. I know. The issue, Doyle said, is that I have a major client who has just signed the largest contract this agency has ever pursued, and that client has a senior brand director who is now, regardless of what actually happened, in a position to credibly allege harassment against my senior strategy director in writing, with a witness signature from the CFO. The truth of the underlying situation is, in this specific narrow legal and commercial context, secondary. Hojun, who had been quiet, said, "What are you asking us to do?" I am not asking either of you to do anything. I am informing you of the situation. The board will meet tomorrow. They will make a decision. I am telling you in advance because I have known both of you long enough to believe you deserve it. What is the decision likely to be? Doyle looked at his desk. The decision is likely to be that they accept Mr. Park's terms. A formal written disciplinary action against Sangwoo, reassignment off the Yoon Group account, a commitment to the client that Sangwoo will not be involved in any future Yoon Group work. And if they do not accept, Hojun said, then we lose the contract, and the people who lose their jobs first, when an agency loses a contract of this size, are not the senior partners. There was a long pause. The office, which had a view of the river that on most days Hojun found beautiful, was now lit by an afternoon sun that he could not have described if asked. There is one other element, Doyle said. The complaint and the witness statement and the recordings that Mr. Park's counsel has already collected from people who had phones out in that hallway are sufficient that the agency's general counsel has advised me to recommend, separately, that we put any pending personnel decisions on hold while the situation is reviewed. Pending personnel decisions, Hojun said. Hojun, your promotion was on the agenda for the board meeting tomorrow. I am telling you now that it will not be on the agenda. I am sorry. The General Counsel is concerned that promoting you while a harassment complaint is open against your direct manager, even one as obviously contextually defensible as this one, would compromise the agency's legal position. The decision will be deferred until the situation is resolved. Hojun did not say anything. Sangwoo was looking at the floor. Doyle, who was a hard man on most days and not a kind man on any of them, did not look pleased to be saying any of this. I am sorry, Doyle said again. If it makes a difference, which I know it will not, I think this is a bad outcome. But the agency cannot absorb a six-figure loss because two of its best people had a bad night at a client event. We have to manage what is in front of us. Doyle, Sangwoo said. Yes. I appreciate you telling us, yes. We will figure it out. Doyle looked at Sangwoo. Sangwoo's face had not moved. Doyle had been a senior figure in this industry for most of his adult life, and he had seen a lot of subordinates take hits in his office. But the calm with which Sangwoo absorbed this one was, even by Doyle's calibrated standards, professionally impressive. All right, Doyle said. Sangwoo and Hojun left the office. They stayed silent through the hallway and the elevator. They reached the creative floor, and Hojun's desk was on one side of it, and Sangwoo's office was on the other, and they stood between the desks for a moment, and Hojun, who had been holding it together, said very quietly, Sangwoo, yes. I am going to lose the promotion. I know. Because of Tuesday. Yes. I do not blame you for Tuesday. Sangwoo's face was the public face, locked tight, the temple not the only sign. I know, he said. Do you? Yes. Okay. They went to their separate corners. Hojun worked through the afternoon. He could not have said afterward what he worked on. Emails were answered. A junior's headline was approved. He went home at the normal time and ate a microwave meal standing up in his kitchen because he did not want to sit down. He texted Yeren, "Not tonight, I will explain later." Yeren texted back, "I will bring soup tomorrow." In the morning, Sangwoo's resignation was on Doyle's desk. It was a clean letter. One paragraph. He acknowledged his actions at the after-party and apologized to the agency for the position they were in. He requested that, in light of the circumstances, the agency accept his resignation rather than proceed with formal disciplinary action against him, on the grounds that the resignation would adequately satisfy the client's stated requirements without the agency having to formally document a finding that he believed would be inconsistent with the actual sequence of events. He offered to remain available on a consulting basis only through the transition, and thanked Doyle for the years. Doyle read it 3 times. Then he picked up the phone and called Sangwoo into his office. "You did not consult me on this," Doyle said. "No, Sangwoo. It is the cleanest version of the outcome they were going to demand. I am giving them what they want before the board has to, which means the board does not have to put anything on paper about me, which means Hojun's promotion review can proceed on its merits. You are quitting, so they will give him the promotion. I am quitting because the alternative is that the agency takes a written disciplinary action against me that I do not believe is consistent with what happened, and that document will live in a file that other people can read for the rest of my career. And Hojun's promotion will stay deferred for as long as that document is open, and the only way to prevent both of those things is for me to not be here. Doyle looked at him for a long moment. Doyle was, in his way, fond of Sangwoo. He did not show it because Doyle did not show fondness for anybody, but he had been looking at Sangwoo as a successor for the last year, and the resignation in his hand was the loss of a very specific personal plan he had not told anyone about. You understand, Doyle said, that the moment I accept this, I cannot unaccept it. You will not have a second chance with this firm. I understand. You also understand that I am not going to tell Hojun why you did this. No, Sangwoo said. You are not. Doyle put the letter down on the desk. All right. By the end of the week, Sangwoo had cleared out his office. He did it on a weekend when nobody was in the building. The things from his desk drawer that mattered to him went into a small box. The rest he left, and the granola bars in the drawer he left exactly where they were, with a note for the cleaning staff to leave them alone. Nobody at the agency knew he was leaving until the resignation had been accepted, processed, and announced through the internal email system, at which point Hojun, sitting at his desk, opened the email and stared at it for a long time, and then walked very quickly to the bathroom and locked himself in a stall for a long while. When he came out, Yeren was waiting outside the bathroom with a cup of coffee. Hojun, she said. Don't. I brought you coffee. Yeren. Okay. She walked back to her desk. Hojun went back to his. He sat down and stared at the email, then at his keyboard, then at the place where Sangwoo's office was, which was, from his angle of view across the floor, visible through the glass partitions, and which now had a junior strategist's belongings in it, because Doyle had reassigned the space within hours of accepting the resignation. Hojun did not text Sangwoo or call him. He worked through the day, went home, did not sleep. The next day, Doyle called him into his office. The promotion was back on the agenda, Doyle said. The board would vote at the end of the week. Doyle expected it would be unanimous. He thought Hojun had earned it, and he wanted Hojun to know that the resignation Sangwoo had offered had, in his judgment, been driven by considerations that Hojun should be aware existed, even if Doyle was not, in this specific conversation, going to be the one to enumerate them. What considerations? Hojun said. I am not going to enumerate them, Hojun. You just said you were not going to enumerate them in this specific conversation. That implies you might in another. I am not going to enumerate them, Hojun. I am telling you they exist. Whatever you choose to do with that information is your business. Hojun looked at the desk for a long moment. Then he stood up. Doyle? Yes. Thank you for telling me they exist. You are welcome. Hojun walked out of Doyle's office, went back to his desk, sat down. He closed his laptop, picked up his coat, walked out of the building. He took a lift to Lowry Hill. Sangwoo's brownstone had no car in front of it. It was a weekday afternoon and the street was empty, and the porch light, which Hojun had teased Sangwoo about installing without a timer, was off. Hojun stood on the sidewalk and looked at the front door and tried to figure out what he was doing there. Instead of knocking, he sat down on the front steps. There was no plan. He was not sure if Sangwoo was inside, was not sure what he was going to say if he was not sure if he was angry or grieving or both, or something else for which neither of those words was a clean fit. He sat on the cold stone steps and let himself feel each of those possibilities one at a time. And after a few minutes, the front door opened behind him. He did not turn around. Sangwoo's voice behind him said, Hojun, were you watching out the window? I was upstairs. I heard the car. You did not have to come down. Yes, I did. There was a pause. Hojun stayed facing the street. Sangwoo did not come down to the steps. They stayed there. Two men who had spent 2 years in the same rooms, separated now by a flight of stone and a door, and a decision Sangwoo had made without him. Sangwoo. Yes. You quit. Yes. You quit so I would get the promotion. That was one of the reasons. What were the other reasons? There was only really that reason. I framed it to myself in a few different ways. They all came down to the same thing. Hojun put his hands flat on his knees. He looked at the street. He could feel Sangwoo behind him. He could smell him, faintly, on the air coming through the open doorway, and the smell hurt, and he had not come here ready to be hurt by it. Doyle hinted, he said. He said there were considerations I should know existed. He would not say what they were. He told me I could do whatever I wanted with the information. Doyle is a kinder man than he wants people to think. I am going to get the promotion. Good. I do not want it. Hojun. I do not want it like this, Hojun said. I do not want it because you walked yourself off a cliff so it would be available. That is not what I did. That is exactly what you did. Hojun, I made a calculation. Sangwoo. The complaint was filed. The board was going to act. The cleanest way out was for me to go before they had to write anything on paper about me. You did not have to. The document they would have written would have lived in your promotion review file as well as mine. You would have spent years explaining it to people who had no business asking. I was not going to let that happen to your career because of something I did at a party. You made the calculation alone. Yes. Without me. Yes. That is the part I am angry about, Sangwoo. The math I understand. The calculation I understand. Doyle is correct that you made a clean version of the choice that was going to be made anyway. I am not stupid. I can read a complaint. I can read an HR situation. I can do the math you did. Then you understand. I understand the math. I do not understand why you did the math by yourself. I did not want you to have to make this decision. Sangwoo, the decision was about your career. It was about your job. It was about you being the one to step out of the building. Why on earth did you imagine that was something I should not be in the room for? Sangwoo did not answer. Hojun put his head in his hands. The cold of the stone steps was coming up through his jeans. The porch light over his head was still off. He could hear Sangwoo's breathing behind him, careful, controlled. The breathing of a man who had built a life around managing what came out of him. You spent 2 years, Hojun said, letting me see the version of you nobody else gets to see. Sangwoo did not move. You sat in a boardroom and let me look at your face for a full minute over a granola bar. You walked across a hallway full of phones and let me see what you actually look like when there is nothing in front of you anymore. And then the consequences came, and you went back. Hojun. No, let me. Hojun took a breath. You wrote a clean letter. You walked it up to Doyle. You quit a job you had earned, and you did it without telling me. I know the math, Sangwoo. Doyle laid it out for me too. You ran the cleaner version of the choice that was going to get made anyway. Fine. Then why did you do it alone? A long silence behind him. That is the part, Hojun said. His voice cracked, just a little. He kept going. The second a hard thing happened, you handled it. You handed me a promotion and a resignation announcement on the same Slack channel, and you decided which version of you I got to keep. He did not turn around. Behind him, he heard Sangwoo very slowly sit down on the top step. Not next to him. A few steps above him. Hojun. Yeah. The hallway. At the walker. Yeah. I have never in my life done anything like that. I know. I do not know what to do with the fact that I did it. I know that too. There was a long pause. Hojun could hear Sangwoo breathing through it. I have been in control of myself, Sangwoo said, for as long as I can remember. It is the only version of me there is. Okay? And then it left. Yeah. Someone I have never met used my body to put a hand on a stranger's throat, and the only person in that hallway who looked at me and was not afraid was you." Hojun did not move. "I came home," Sangwoo said. "I sat on this porch in the dark. I tried to figure out how to be the man I was on Monday. And I could not." Sangwoo's voice was very level. The level voice was doing a lot of work. Then Doyle called the next morning, and the complaint was on his desk, and the only thing I could think was that the version of me that did that thing had now taken something from you, so I quit. Sangwoo. I told myself I was being noble. He stopped. He started again. What I was actually being was a coward. Sangwoo. I would rather walk out of a room than figure out who I am in front of someone who already knows. Hojun did not move. The cold was in his hands. The street was empty. A cab went past at the end of the block and turned and did not come back. Sangwoo. Yes. Come down here. There was a pause. Then Sangwoo, very slowly, walked down the steps. He did not sit next to Hojun. He stood on the sidewalk in front of him, his hands in his coat pockets, his face the public face, except that it was not, because Hojun was looking up at him from the steps, and the public face had never held when Hojun was looking up at it. "You did not lock him back down," Hojun said. "What?" "The version of you. Underneath." Sangwoo's face shifted. Hojun watched it happen. "You wrote a letter in his voice. You handed it to Doyle. And then you came home. And you have been sitting in this house all week, not locking him back down." Hojun. "He is right there, Sangwoo. I can see him from here." Hojun gestured at his face. "You did not put him away. You took him home and you would not let anyone see him until you knew what to do with him. That is not the same thing." Sangwoo did not move. "That is not the cold one," Hojun said, quieter. "That is a man who is scared." A long pause. "I am going to ask you something," Hojun said, "and I want you to answer me as that man, not as the level one." "Okay. Do you want me here?" The face went open. The whole way. The same face from the hallway at the Walker, the same face from the boardroom over the granola bar, except that there was no audience now, no consequences, no clients, no Doyle, no phones, just the two of them on a residential street in Lowry Hill in the late afternoon, and Sangwoo was looking down at Hojun with no control left in his face. "Yes," he said. Hojun stood up. The steps were uneven. He was not entirely steady. He took one step down, and Sangwoo took half a step toward him, and they met in the middle, on the bottom step, in the cold, with the empty street behind them, and the porch light still off, and the entire 2-year wall finally not there. Hojun put one hand on Sangwoo's chest, over his heart. Then he reached up with his other hand and put it on the back of Sangwoo's neck. Sangwoo's face came down slowly, and Hojun's came up, and the first kiss was not careful at all. It was the opposite of careful. It was every late night in the boardroom, every working dinner where their hands had not touched, every cab ride home, every pastry, every granola bar, every face Hojun had catalogued for 2 years collapsing at once into one moment that lasted exactly as long as both of them needed it to last. When it ended, Sangwoo was still holding the back of Hojun's neck. Hojun was still holding the front of his coat. "Sangwoo. Yes. You quit my agency." "Yes. That is going to be very awkward at the office holiday party next year." Sangwoo laughed out loud. On a sidewalk in Lowry Hill, with his hand on Hojun's neck and a kite lifting visibly through the trees behind them, the man Hojun had never once heard laugh at the agency was laughing. "I am no longer invited," he said. "You are absolutely invited. I am the senior creative. I will get you in." Hojun. "Yeah. I want to do this properly." "Define properly." "I want to have dinner with you on Saturday. I want to take you somewhere. I want to bring you back here afterward, if you want to come back here. I want to wake up on Sunday and decide what we are. I want to do the part I tried to skip. Sangwoo. We are already what we are. We have been what we are for at least a year. You can do the dinner, I am going to enjoy the dinner. But you do not have to perform a courtship for me. I have been here. I have seen you. The dinner is for fun, not for proof. Okay. Also, the granola bars are still in your old desk. Doyle told the cleaning staff to leave them. I am eating them at the rate of 1 per workday. I will be done by midsummer. Hojun. Yes. Is this going to be okay? Sangwoo. We have been okay for 2 years. Now we are just going to be okay out loud. He did not let go of Sangwoo's coat, and Sangwoo's hand stayed at the back of his neck. Eventually they went inside, and the porch light, which had been off for almost a week, came on a few minutes later and stayed on for the rest of the night. Sangwoo took the offer from the smaller agency that had been trying to poach him for the last year. They were sharper, leaner, did better work. He started a few weeks later. The Yoon group never mentioned the Afterparty again, and the contract with Halverson Park went forward without further complaint, because Daewon Park, who had filed the complaint to protect his own dignity rather than because he had been wronged in any way that survived sober reflection, was quietly transferred to a different division of the hotel chain at the request of the CFO, who had, apparently, also been doing the math, and who had reached a different conclusion than the one her witness statement had implied. Hojun got the promotion. The board vote was, as Doyle had predicted, unanimous. Yerin won the betting pool. She used a portion of it to buy Hojun a very nice bottle of wine, which she presented at his desk on his first day as senior creative director with a card that read, simply, "About time." The rest of the pool she used to buy a winter coat she had been wanting for 2 years, which she wore to the office every day for the rest of the season with what Hojun privately diagnosed as an indecent amount of pride. The trade journalist who had been at the after-party and had filmed part of the hallway incident on her phone wrote a short piece about it. It was not what anyone had expected. She had been covering agencies for long enough to recognize the difference between a story and a hit piece, and she described what she had actually seen, which was a senior strategist crossing a room to remove a drunk client's hand from a colleague's wrist. The agency's general counsel tried to get the piece killed. The journalist declined. The piece ran. Doyle, in his office, read it and put it in a file. Sangwoo and Hojun started having dinner. Not all the time. Sangwoo's new agency was demanding. Hojun's promotion was demanding. They had weekends. They had a few weeknights sometimes when Sangwoo's schedule allowed. They had each other's apartments eventually. They had Sangwoo's brownstone, which Hojun very slowly began to fill with things that had not been there before, because Sangwoo's apartment was, quote, depressingly minimalist, and because Hojun had been quietly collecting items for it for years and had nowhere else to put them. He brought a lamp, then a rug, then 2 plants, then a coffee maker that ground the beans fresh, because the one Sangwoo had was, quote, a war crime. The bonding happened on Sangwoo's birthday in the kitchen of the brownstone. Hojun had not asked for it. They had talked about it because they talked about everything now, but they had agreed it was not a thing to schedule. It was a thing that would happen when it happened. They had been together long enough by then that the question was no longer whether, but when. Hojun had stopped wearing scent neutralizers around Sangwoo months earlier. Sangwoo had stopped sleeping in the spare room of his own house months before that. Their scents had been mixing in the bedroom and the kitchen and the back of the cab and the office Sangwoo no longer worked at, until the smell of struck match held over wet stone had stopped being a thing that surprised either of them and had started being the smell of every quiet morning together. Hojun woke up early because he was making breakfast. That was the plan. There were eggs. There would be pancakes. The warmth at the base of his spine had been climbing slowly since the night before, low and steady, the start of a cycle his body had been timing toward this morning without asking him about it. He had been off suppressants for weeks now. Sangwoo had stopped asking, and they had stopped pretending it was an open question. He was making Sangwoo a birthday breakfast. because Sangwoo, who was a very accomplished man in a lot of ways, could not cook. He was at the counter in one of Sangwoo's shirts when Sangwoo came downstairs. Sangwoo had been awake. He was always awake before Hojun, although he had stopped pretending not to have been waiting for Hojun to come down. He came up behind Hojun at the counter and put his hands on Hojun's hips and set his chin on the top of Hojun's head, and Hojun said, "Level, happy birthday." Hojun, you are not allowed to cook for yourself on your birthday. I am perfectly capable of cooking for myself. Sangwoo, you cannot cook. I have eaten your cooking. You are a very accomplished man with many gifts, but you cannot fry an egg. I can fry an egg. You can technically fry an egg. The eggs you produce are legally eggs. They are not eggs anyone would want to eat. Sangwoo's chest moved against Hojun's back, the small exhale that, on Sangwoo, was a laugh. Hojun. What? Will you turn around? Hojun turned around. Sangwoo's hands stayed on his hips. The kitchen was warm. The pancake batter was sitting in a bowl on the counter because Hojun had not actually started cooking yet, and the eggs were still in the carton, and the coffee maker was making the noises it made when it was nearly done, and Sangwoo's face was the private one, all of it. No work in it, no level voice, no public composure. Just Sangwoo in a t-shirt in his own kitchen, looking at Hojun. I want to bond with you, Sangwoo said. Hojun looked at him. Now, Sangwoo said, on my birthday, in our kitchen, before the pancakes. You are proposing this with the pancake batter in the bowl. Yes, you have had 2 years to plan this, and you picked the moment when I was about to crack eggs. I had a plan, Hojun. I was going to do it on a hill. I had a hill picked. I have looked at the hill twice. But you are standing in our kitchen in my shirt making me breakfast, and the hill is a stupid idea, and I do not want to wait for the hill. Hojun put one hand on Sangwoo's chest. He could feel Sangwoo's heart through the t-shirt, beating hard against his palm. Okay, Hojun said. Okay? Okay. Bond with me. Now. In our kitchen. Before the pancakes. Sangwoo's eyes closed for a second, then opened. He brought one hand up to the side of Hojun's neck, where the gland was. Hojun turned his head to one side, slowly, deliberately, and bared it for him. Sangwoo's mouth came down. The first claiming bite was not careful. It was not gentle. The bond opened between them all at once, and the smell of struck match held over wet stone filled the kitchen and rolled out through the cracked window and settled over the empty street outside, where a neighbor walking a dog paused without knowing why and looked at the brownstone and then walked on. Hojun's hand came up to grip the back of Sangwoo's head and held him there. Hojun felt the bond settle. It was not a metaphor. It was a real thing. A warmth at the base of his neck where Sangwoo's mouth was. A pulling sensation through his chest, and underneath both of those a third thing that was simply Sangwoo, present in him, the level one and the private one and the man who had crossed the hallway at the Walker, all of them at once, all of them his. He could feel Sangwoo feeling it back. The bond was alive. Sangwoo was relieved, undone, and somewhere deep in himself, laughing. The wall he had kept between himself and other people for years was finally gone, and the inside of him was being seen by the only person he had ever wanted to see it. And he could feel through the bond that the person seeing him was not afraid. Sangwoo lifted his head. The bite mark on Hojun's neck was warm. Hojun reached up and put his fingers on it. The mark hummed under his touch. Sangwoo. Yes, I can feel you. I know. You are extremely emotional right now. I am aware. Sangwoo, your face is doing the thing. I am bonded. The face is allowed to do whatever it wants. Hojun started laughing. He could not help it. The bond was new and warm in his chest, and Sangwoo's eyes were absolutely doing the thing, and the pancake batter was still in the bowl, and the coffee maker had finished and was beeping at them from across the room. And Sangwoo was now bonded, and visibly losing his composure in front of his bonded mate and the eggs. Sangwoo pressed his forehead to Hojun's. His voice was rough and very quiet. "Cannot wait to start a family with you." Hojun's hands tightened on the back of his t-shirt, and the bond carried the years of wanting behind the words. "Yeah," he said. "Me too. After we have lived in this house long enough that the porch light works on a timer like a normal porch light." Sangwoo laughed, the small exhale against his mouth. "Eat your pancakes, Sangwoo. You have not made them yet. I am going to. Sangwoo, I love you." The bond pulsed. Sangwoo's face went open, all the way in his own kitchen, with the coffee maker beeping and the egg still in the carton and his bonded mate in his arms. "I love you, Hojun." Hojun turned back to the counter. He cracked the eggs. Sangwoo stayed behind him with one hand at the small of his back. The porch light, which had been off all morning, came on by accident when Hojun bumped the switch on his way past, and stayed on. The end. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the story, tell me your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear from you.